A few years ago, a very clever Englishman called Ben had an idea for a racing car. It was to answer a specific criticism with modern racing about downforce, because modern racing cars have to have downforce, particularly sports cars, to go around corners quickly at high speed. That's part of the sport. But they create so much turbulence that they become quite inefficient in going through the air, and they're very difficult to overtake each other because there's so much turbulent air coming off the back. He created something called the DeltaWing. But the problem is there was nowhere to race the car. It wasn't eligible for any championships. And then a very brave car manufacturer called Nissan came along and said, we can do something with this. This is too cool not to have a part to play in our global motorsport ambitions. The rest is history. They went to Le Mans, where the car was doing really well until it got punted off by an LMP2 car. And 2 days ago at Road Atlanta, it came 5th overall in Petit Le Mans, which is really, really cool. And now we're going to get the chance to drive it. Problem with the seat because I'm a bit chunkier than their normal drivers, so they're going to go to tubby spec now.
Should we try his radio? It looks like a 4-pin.
No, mate. So this is Road Atlanta in a DeltaWing. I think the most exciting racing car in 30 years, and it performs in a way that doesn't square with how it looks. Please excuse me if I'm not as fast as the works drivers. So we come up. Out of turn 1. You have to watch the width of the rear axle, obviously. This circuit is just fantastic. It auto upshift, so I'm not doing that. That's an auto upshift. And then at the back here, gearbox is a bit slow because I wanted to save it. Turn 7 here is actually first gear. Take an early apex, and then this is where the DeltaWing does its thing. It is faster with 320 horsepower. It's faster than a P1 car on the back straight. Flat out through the king. Or not. Runs a second through here. The steering is hard, super fast. You have to drive it a bit like an old 911. Get it stopped, turn it in, and then get on the gas and drive it through the corner. I can't believe I'm doing this in a car with a front wheel diameter of a 2CV. How does that work?
turbo car. What an exciting car. Well, why won't people let it race? 300 horsepower and it's doing this. It feels like, honestly, it feels like about 600 horsepower. That's what it feels like to me. 417 kilograms. It does. You hit the brakes and the stability of the car is remarkable. No ABS, but traction control. Brilliant. DeltaWing, you are as cool as you look.
That's not like anything I've driven before. Quite an odd car. Very interesting.
Yeah, we'll put that in.
Ben, this is a magnificent machine. I've had one go in it and done about 5 laps. Everything in my head tells me that having looked at the front of the car, it shouldn't work. For the first time, we might have a look underneath it, and then you can tell me why you say it's physics and science that makes it work, and I think it's some kind of a hex, or maybe it's snake oil. I don't know what it is, but it shouldn't work, but it does.
It is counterintuitive, so you know, I will explain how it works.
Okay, well let's have the cover off it, and we'll see what it actually looks like underneath. You did say earlier, you said, did you look underneath the front of the car before you drove it? Because if you look underneath it, you won't want to drive it.
That's true, because it is, you know, the tyres are 100 millimetres wide. I mean, they are the size of a deux chevaux. I mean, it's extraordinary. Same diameter, same width. And, you know, the wishbones, because the loads are so small, because the whole front end of the car is so light, the gauge of the steel is minute. I mean, it's less than a millimetre thick. So we've got incredibly spindly, light little pieces. I mean, your steering arms, these are titanium and, you know, 1.5 millimetres.
I'm not sure I want to look at this. I mean, look at the spring.
Right.
So can you tell me what vehicle this spring and damper unit assembly comes from?
Well, it's practically a mountain bike, I have to tell you.
Sorry, can we get that? It's a mountain bike. Did you get that? It's a mountain bike. So I'm going to test you. This is the biggest test you've ever had. If you thought designing the car was difficult, explain to a moderately educated car fan audience how the hell that works.
Well, it works because the amount of weight that is carried by the front axle and the distribution of the downforce that's made under the car on the front axle and the tyre capacity are all actually in harmony. They're all matched. So the specific contact patch load, the stress at the front, is the same as the stress at the back. So it's like an aircraft is a 2D lift and weight, has to balance. In our case, we have a third dimension, which is the tyre. So our negative lift, our mass distribution and our tyre distribution in terms of the capacity of the tyres is all balanced.
Yeah.
And that's why it goes around the corner.
And it has a very interesting behaviour, steering behaviour, doesn't it, in the faster turns you're talking about, in terms of the aerodynamic load versus the grip that you're generating for the front of the car. Because of this narrow setup at the front, it behaves completely differently.
It does tend to behave very differently, and in fact the tyres are used much more efficiently because they're very close together. And typically on a rear engine, rear wheel drive, rear weight bias car, the inside front tyre is almost doing no work through the corner. So one tyre is doing almost all the work, whereas in our case, because of all of the roll stiffness being at the rear, the two front tyres see the same load all the time, and because they're really close to the centre line, instead of it feeling like you've got the brakes on the one tyre that's working that kind of gives an understeer when it's trying to give you turning through the corner, we don't have that problem because the scrub drag, as it's called, of the front tyres acts directly straight back on the centre of gravity. So all of the tyre's effort goes into turning the car around the corner rather than some of it, the drag element, being an understeer moment. So it's all to do with, you know, forces and balances and moments, and and you know, that's what makes the car go around the corner. When you see the rear suspension, that'll freak you out.
Okay, let's have a look at the rear suspension then. Oh dear God. Right. Okay.
So there are two conventional dampers with springs on them here, but it's how they're connected up that's a bit peculiar. So we have push rods from the wheels, and that's sort of fairly understandable. This is the pivot point here. So when the push rods, when the car is being pushed down, the push rods come in this way and they pull on these pull rods. And you're thinking, why on earth do we have to go through all this monkey motion? But back here, we have a beam that amplifies the amount of damper displacement in roll compared to in heave. And that's very important because all of the damping for the car in roll is done by the rear end of the car. So if we weren't careful, we would land up with a car that had inadequate damping in roll. And so we want to give it optimum damping in heave, but in order to get enough in roll, we have to overdrive the dampers when there is a roll moment. And so this allows us to do that by the ratio from this. So this is the axis of rotation for the beam. It's also the anti-roll bar.
And what's the gearing effect on it?
So this is about 1.2 times as fast, and obviously because it's velocity squared, you have to square 1.2 for the damper force that you get off it. So it's quite heavily damped in roll because it has to do all the work that normally half of it would have been done by the front end, and we don't have a front end that's rolling around. So we've got this feeling. I don't know if you felt when you were driving the car that the rear felt very flat and stable. It never felt like it kind of lurched,
no, it doesn't at all.
There was no delay in taking load, and that's, you still had a best part of 20 millimeters of roll occurring, but you didn't feel it because it was very well damped. And so we went through this rather elegant but kind of monkey motion layout to enable us to have, in a very passive and simple way, more damping in roll than in heave.
And what's the spring rate? Because it's quite an open wound spring, that.
It's an 850 pounds per inch spring, and we actually went up here compared to Le Mans. Le Mans we ran a 750, but the loads at this track are so obscene. I mean, this track is crazy high loads. I mean, it's nearly 4G through turn one when you're on it. And so we actually had to support the car a bit more.
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to say thank you there, because I could listen to that all day long, but we'd have to have a 50-minute episode to listen to Ben go on about it. But mate, it's extraordinary.
Awesome.
And clearly it still excites you.
It does. I mean, it really does excite me because it is unexpected, and we keep discovering that it has, at first, one of the things we hadn't sort of realised was that the car was going to be stable under brakes. You still think, it's got an awful lot of braking at the rear. It has to, because they've got bigger tyres at the back. How's that going to feel? Well, it's like launching a parachute behind you. That's a good idea. If you try and launch a parachute in front of you, and that is one of the unique aspects of this car. A parachute launched in front would try and turn the car around. But every racing car that we raced against on Saturday has more total braking force occurring at the front axle. So if you lock a rear, it's going round. This car, if the guys pushed a little hard and locked a rear, it didn't really matter. They could still make the corner. It just locked it up a little bit. Very, very different set of circumstances that make a car that has fundamental stability. And
I think it's fantastic. I really do. Privileged to drive it. Thank you.